All right, guys, welcome back to the Fawkes Den. This is FAWKES News. As promised, I have a special guest this evening, my first special guest on the new Fawkes channel. But this is really important breaking news, and it's an important news to me and my profession and what I do as a full-time podcaster and radio style host. George Soros buying up 200 radio stations, the second largest radio station network, Odyssey, buying it up, kind of superseding, going around the FCC's rules in doing this. This is a bombshell report. Included in this network are names that you recognize, conservative names like Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, Mark Levin. All of these big conservative talk hosts under Odyssey now, as of next week, will be owned under George Soros as he's buying Odyssey out from a $400 million debt. Now, he is going around the FCC in many ways. I have Jonathan Emord, America's last constitutional litigator, who actually started out with the SEC. He's very knowledgeable on this. Also, in the same week, there was litigation back in 2019 and 2020 where the Department of Justice ordered a consent decree to Dish and EchoStar that they had to support or supply rural America with internet service, with 5G internet service, because tens of millions of their tax dollars went into internet as well, and they weren't getting the internet services that their taxes were paying for. And so there was a 3-year plan that EchoStar and Dish had to get rural America 5G internet. Not only did rural America not get supplied with the 5G internet, but as of this week, they have been completely relieved of that obligation. The FCC, without warning, without any due process, without any vote, without any talk for not any views from the public or from their own commission, they just said, you don't have to do it. All of this within 40 days of an election. So without further ado, let me bring on Jonathan Emord to make sense of all of this. Jonathan, thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it. How are you doing this evening?
Great. How are you?
Oh, I would be better if I wasn't so afraid. Listen, I've always been a little bit weary of George Soros. A long time ago, or not a long time ago, but about a year ago, I did a podcast with you where I was averaging about 1,500 views on the YouTubes. And then you brought up that you were running against a George Soros backed campaign. And we had about 6 people in the live chat, which was an all-time low. Out of the 4 years, I've always had at least, the least I'd ever had at that point was 50 people in a live chat. And that was a complete failure. Internet was bad. Cameras were bad. So to go to something like the number of 6, because I had you on, was one of the scarier moments of my podcast career. That's when I became scared of George Soros. Now, when you Google George Soros, like I just Googled him today, it doesn't matter what you Google about George Soros. The top 5 or 6 pages of Google are all about how misinformation has demonized George Soros. You can't even look at the article you're trying to find without having to first go through 5 or 6 pages of how George Soros has been the victim of far right-wing conspiracy theories. I don't know that they are conspiracy theories. They seem to be conspiracy fact, especially on the heels of this buyout of conservative radios. Now, a few years ago, a Hispanic radio station was bought by George Soros and the Soros Foundation, and it was an anti-communist Hispanic news source. The radio station was actually out of Miami, but broadcasted to South Americans. And after he bought it, they went with a much softer kind of entertainment, society, and culture style news. And so the conservative talk hosts then left that affiliation and actually went over to Odyssey. And now it seems like Soros is buying Odyssey. And so is this an attack on anti-communist conservative radio hosts, or do you think it's much more than that?
Well, let's talk about who we're dealing with in George Soros. We're dealing with a person who is a totalitarian, who believes in a global government. He's a globalist. He does not believe in our republic. He doesn't believe in a society that defends individual rights. He believes in a society in which there's centralized government control and in which people are basically enslaved to the state and are pawns. He has an affinity for communism in that he favors totalitarian government. And he wants a one world government. He believes in open borders for the United States because he wants to destroy the United States. He believes in prosecutors who won't prosecute. And so he has succeeded in getting those individuals elected in jurisdictions that now embrace about 80% of the population in the United States are under Soros-backed prosecutors who will not prosecute crime, commonly will not prosecute crime, and are allowing people to get out of jail without completing their sentences, and also doesn't believe in cash bail, and who advocates open borders. These candidates also advocate open borders. So he's an enemy of the United States by everything that he does. And so when he acquires 200 Odyssey stations, in addition to the station that he has in Florida, this is for a political purpose. It's nothing that he does on a scale that large in the United States is not tainted completely with political motivation. And those motivations are ones that are in favor of destroying our country. So it's not a surprise that he would try to get a foothold, a big one, in the media. And while it may be that radio is not the preferred method of communication, he has a means now to communicate a message that he wishes to, and to keep out of the news, more importantly, information that is helpful to conservatives. Essentially what he did with the Florida station, he can now do all over the United States. And some of these stations, as you pointed out, carry Hannity, carry Glenn Beck, and carry other conservative commentators. I don't know how long that's going to persist under Soros's control, but I doubt it will be very long. And then we have this strange thing at the FCC where traditionally this sort of thing would be investigated on national security grounds, because the investment money that he's bringing in here is over 25% of the investments into it are from foreign sources. Under the Communications Act, foreign control and ownership of media is prohibited. It's against the Federal Communications Commission Act. And they have sort of a litmus test that they've developed of around 25%. And when they look at these transactions, it oftentimes is a detailed look to see where all the money's coming from. And that process takes 6 months to a year to complete. And here you have them fast tracking this for Soros, because he's a friend of the administration, a friend of the Democrat Party, and a friend of the Democrat leadership at the FCC. And they let it go through, and he's going to take control over these 200 stations here imminently, probably next week. And they haven't done their work under the act or under the regulations. They've given them a sweetheart deal at the FCC. It's disgusting. Strict party line vote. 3 commissioners or Democrats voted in favor and 2 Republicans voted against. It reeks of political favoritism for a person who hates this country and who would very readily be supportive of Kamala Harris, and is. His son just met with Waltz a few days ago. His son really runs the operations now. His father's too old, and the son is as radical or more radical than the father. And his alignment with Waltz and with Harris is indicative of a continuation of their degree of influence and control, which has supported everything from defunding the police, which he strongly supports, all across the nation, putting in millions and millions of dollars into political movements to advocate defunding police. And he also advocates the Soros-backed prosecutors, as I mentioned, and he also advocates no border at all for the United States. So that's an agenda of destruction of our criminal justice system and of our national defense and our national security. And this man is as much an enemy of the United States as Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un in North Korea, or the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. He's not our friend, and he's working with our enemies.
Rural Americans, when I've always thought that there was in this administration kind of a war against rural Americans. There's this kind of urgency to build more cities, to build these kind of circular cities that everybody lives around. A rural American's probably less likely to listen to a podcast on paper. They're probably a little bit more old school and a little bit more going towards the radio. So going after radio stations, which a lot of people, the big city folks or the more modern, the younger, the zennials, the millennials would say that radio is dying because we've all moved on to podcasts. But I think rural America, just like they have not had 5G internet in a lot of these places, they haven't moved on to podcasts because they simply don't have the internet access to utilize podcasts in a lot of these rural areas. I myself live in a very rural area, and I'm trying to move to an even more rural area. And I know how important and how hard it has been to find internet to be able to podcast full time in some of these rural cities. So in controlling of the media, of the radio, you are essentially controlling what rural America, or what a large percentage of rural America is hearing. Do you think that is kind of the goal here in going after conservative radio that everybody just kind of doesn't pay attention to in the bigger cities?
I think that it's part of a larger overall plan. So I think this is one component of Soros's plans, to have a foothold in the media, to influence media, to become a power broker in the media. He has enormous control over the Democrat Party. He doesn't have as much control over the media. So I don't think it's the end. I think it's the beginning of a Soros presence. As long as this is allowed, as long as this man who hates our country and who's really an enemy of the nation and who wants to destroy it is given more and more opportunities to achieve his objectives, he'll seize them. I think he looked at this as an opportunity to acquire 200 stations across the country. And I think you're talking about millions of people who are likely listening to those stations. So he has a little bit of an impact. He does things this way. It's a long-term plan. It's not like we typically think of things in the West. We like to see dramatic results. We like to see effects that are immediate. This man has a long history around the world of insinuating himself into government and into society and trying to wreck both and destroy those in favor of a global government. His view is, if he's able to destabilize the West, he can achieve greater control, just as the Democrat Party has used the fear factor with COVID and so forth to induce people to feel dependency, to understand that, or to perceive government as the only solution, as the only way they can get security in an unsafe world. They create the environment for that insecurity. This is what Soros understands as well. You destabilize economies, you destabilize social structures, you cause people to be fearful, and then they will abandon their defense of their rights in favor of security. And that's the idea overall, and that's what he's tried to do in country after country. Every country of the world except ours has kicked him out. We have formed this whole haven for Soros, and it's due to the amount of money he's poured into the Democrat coffers, from Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, now Kamala Harris. He's an evil, evil man, and his intentions are evil. His son is in this 100%, and they mean to do us in. And if we don't wake up to it and recognize him for who he is and deal with him for who he is, we're going to end up with more and more and more of this chaos. It's not a coincidence that BLM and Antifa suddenly have all sorts of money, or that the Muslim Brotherhood has all sorts of money in the United States. George Soros has been financing through his various open society network affiliates much of this destabilization activity, and has done so for years. If you read Azra Nomani's book, Woke Army, you can see that George Soros has been active in supporting the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States for many years. And this is the same man who says, I'm Jewish and I'm oppose Republicans because they're anti-Semites. Well, my goodness, the Muslim Brotherhood wants to destroy, literally kill, every Jew and every Christian in the world, wants to overthrow the state of Israel. And yet George Soros has been pumping them full of money. Why is that? Because his goal of destabilizing the United States is greater than any other factor. He wants that to happen.
I'm glad that he's kind of woken up a giant. As Fox News, I always promise I bring you guys receipts. So I'm going to show you guys kind of where I've sourced some of this information. But first, I want to play this recording from the Glenn Beck show this afternoon. Take a look at this.
I got to tell you, if this was a conservative doing this, I doubt the FCC would have okayed it. Any ramifications? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, Glenn, we actually have that example. So not too long ago, maybe a year or so ago, there was a group of conservative buyers that wanted to purchase some South Florida radio stations. And a number of Democrats spoke up very loudly and said the FCC cannot allow these conservative outlets to buy these radio stations because, in the Democrats' view, it could cost them elections in South Florida. And amidst that pressure campaign, the conservative buyers abandoned the deal. And so we've seen across the board concerted efforts by Democrats to sort of weaponize the government to go against conservative speech. There was California Democrats in Congress that wrote letter to cable companies telling them to drop Fox News, Newsmax, and OAN because of the editorial decisions that their newsrooms were making. We had a Baltimore Democrat prosecutor called on the FCC to investigate a local TV station that was exposing her own corruption. And so this is sort of the reverse side of a pattern that we've been living under the last couple of years of weaponization of government power, in my view, frankly, against free speech.
Your take on I'm sorry. Your take on that, Mr. Emord, about the weaponization of the FCC, and more specifically, is we saw this with Project Veritas, who tried to expose a diary, and on their entire, for the first time in maybe I'm wrong. You were part of the FCC. You were hands-on in the FCC for many, many years. So maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but as far as I know, the first time in American history that a news outlet of any form was actually ransacked by the Department of Justice, by the FBI, and every single one of their cameras was taken away on these search warrants and essentially shut the entire Project Veritas down, just attack them over exposing, one, the Ashley Biden diary, and exposing what was going on with Pfizer. And I just wanted to read this really quick. This was this is from Fox News. This is an older article. I wanted to just read what O'Keefe was referring to, an explosive expose from January of a man described as a Pfizer director of research and development, Jordan Tristan Walker, telling an undercover Project Veritas journalist that the company was exploring plans to mutate the COVID-19 virus themselves through direct evolution. And suddenly, just a few days after that, an unusual emergency happened, O'Keefe states. So this was back in February of 2023 when that happened. First, what happened was their purchasing of the Ashley Biden diary. And that was when, all the warrants in the FBI raided and took around their cameras and their lights, which is very hard to recover from. And then they come out with this expose on Pfizer, and all of a sudden, chaos, and now we no longer have Project Veritas. Are you accustomed to, is the FCC, is this something normal for the FCC, the weaponization of the FCC?
It has become normal. So unfortunately, so I was at the FCC really for a short period of time, for a year. But during that time, one thing that was very clear to us under the Fowler regime, Mark Fowler was the chairman of the FCC, a person of incredible integrity, who believed strongly in the Constitution, the First Amendment, and it was very clear that if a court issued an order, even one that you disliked, you would follow the rule of law. What we have now at the Department of Justice, at the FBI, CIA, the White House, the executive branch agencies, including the FCC, the FTC, the SEC, the EPA, is this culture of individuals who believe that the ends justify the means, and that even if the means are unlawful or held so by a court, that will not detain them or restrain them from pursuing it because they believe they're all powerful and unanswerable to the courts and the Congress, the American people. This is a lawless state. This is where we are. And this is what the Supreme Court is dealing with. This is in no small measure what motivated the justices, no doubt, to get rid of the Chevron doctrine of deference to administrative agencies in the Loper Bright Enterprises case, which was rightly decided. but it is the duty and the province of the courts, not these agencies, not the executive departments, to decide what the law is. It's the only way we have checks and balances. So these are people who don't respect limits on power. You have to understand that. These people don't care that there are laws. They think that if the ends exist that they want to achieve, they will get there one way or another. They will find some way to do it. This is a president who, when he excused loans for college students, and that was held unconstitutional, a violation of the statute, actually, he proceeds to do it anyway, right? And that has once again been held unlawful. He doesn't care. He doesn't care that the open borders violate the immigration laws of the United States. He does not care. He does it anyway. He doesn't care that compelling people to be silenced by White House influence, as was revealed through the Twitter files, is a violation of the First Amendment. He doesn't care that he censors you from communicating criticism of his administration's policies or revealing the details of the scandal that he's embroiled in that's massive with his son in selling out the United States to its enemies for personal profit. He doesn't care that he censors you on those things because it's the ends, ensuring that he remains in power, that's all important, and expanding his power. This is not just unique to the President of the United States. This is favored by most Democrats in the Democrat Party. This is why you will never see a movement towards impeachment of Joe Biden that it succeeds. It's the reason that they have two standards of justice. They have a standard that applies to themselves, and they have a different standard that applies to Republicans. In fact, in the lawfare prosecution of Donald Trump, we see that out of whole cloth, they create laws for enforcement. They don't even follow the existing law. Every single one of these cases against Trump should be thrown out because they don't meet the elements necessary to bring the action in the first place. And yet they create new law, and they're slapped down for it, and they persist with it anyway. You have a decision by the Supreme Court on immunity, and you have nonetheless Jack Smith, who doesn't give a hoot about it, gives it short shrift, and reintroduces charges all over again. They are shameless. They don't follow the rule of law. They don't follow the Constitution. They don't follow the Supreme Court. They want power, and they'll get it any way they can.
I like the recent example of that, where I don't know if you saw it or not, but Donald Trump went into a grocery store and he gives a female $100. Her bill was actually $194 in groceries, and he gave her $100 a bill. And of course, everybody's screaming election fraud, election fraud. But in the same token, they have flown in the same week, in the same day, even they have flown Zelensky over on an American C-17, brought him into Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I believe it was what was his? It was a Josh Shapiro signing these bombs in a manufacturing, which, I don't know, a lot about it, but I remember reading tons of articles that we were only giving them stockpile ammunition, and the money that we were making from the stockpile ammunition was going to go into our back into the American businesses to create new and fresh ammunition for ourselves. But those bombs that he was signing in that Scranton manufacturing facility looked brand new, hot, fresh off the press. So I guess now we're not giving them stockpile ammunition. Now we're just making and manufacturing munitions for them, but that's okay. In a battleground state, you can bring Zelensky in and you can autograph bombs for Zelensky on camera, and that's not voter interference. But Trump giving $100 for $194 worth of groceries, it is. It's really, it is the rules for thee and not for me kind of situation. I want to bring up this article real fast. This is from the New York Times. It just says left-leaning billionaire George Soros is trying to recruit the Democrat-controlled FCC to help fast-track his takeover of the nation's second biggest radio network. Soros, 93, pumped $400 million into Odyssey in February, a network which reaches 165 million monthly listeners and includes a handful of conservative shows from hosts including Sean Hannity, Dana Loesch, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck, and Eric Erickson, but their influence is likely to be muted. But their influence is likely to be muted if the billionaire takes over and impose his agenda. And if I go back into a further example of it getting muted, this was also an older article from the New York Post. I'll post both of these in the show notes. But this is in June 2022, the Soros-backed Latino media network. They bought Mambe, so a mainstay of Miami's hardline anti-communist Cuban exile community for decades, and 17 other Spanish language radio stations from Televisa Univision, and an estimated $60 million deal. The newly formed network was run by two former Democrat operatives, Stephanie Valencia and Jess Morales Racato, who worked on Barack Obama's and Hillary Clinton's political campaigns. Valencia also worked in the Obama White House. If you skip down, Ubeda now hosts a conservative Spanish radio show on Odyssey. So Soros buys it. The anti-communist conservative host leaves, go to Odyssey. Again, that's kind of what I said at the beginning of the show, and I will put that down in the show notes. And then I just want to skip over last but not least. This is another article. The FCC Commission quietly decided Friday to delay a build out that would bring internet to rural communities. That decision has been slammed by Commissioner Brandon Carr as the worst abuse of agency process that he has ever seen in the 12 years working at the FCC. Dish chairperson and longtime Democrat donor Charlie Ergen was given up to 3 more years to bring service to the most remote communities in the U.S. by the FCC last week without giving the public or internal FCC officials any input. I've never heard, is a quote, I've never heard of the FCC granting relief like this with no process, no public input, and no heads up. The Democrats and FCC leadership cut a secret backroom deal, one that kept the Republican FCC commissioners and others completely in the dark, and then hustled it out the door on a Friday afternoon. It just all seems to be ramping up right here before the elections. On a final note, how do you feel like this plays out?
As far as the election, or
as far as long term, do you think that does the conservatives? I don't even like to say the right and conservatives anymore, because I feel like there's too many neocons, too many rhino Republicans. I would say we'll just call it big government. I would like to call the left and the right at this point almost like big government, big media. Does big government and big media win, or do you think there's enough independence through podcasts, through independent journalists, YouTube, other social media outlets? Is there enough of that to kind of combat this, or do you overall see big government getting their way?
So this is like a prize fight in which the advocate of liberty, who's one of the boxers, is slowly reduced after 22 rounds to his knees based on 1,000 hits and doesn't do much to defend himself. So we've been in a position of taking hits all over and of being brought down to our knees. And it doesn't mean that we can't get up. It just means that so far we've been willing to take it, and we've been willing to suffer it, probably because it wasn't we didn't confront us with a solid image of where we're going to go. But once you're on your knees, you know that you're either going to fall or you're going to stand, and you've got your choice. I think we're going to be brought to our knees. I think we're close to that, if not there. And I think that the American people are going to revolt. I think that we are not going to be enslaved in the last analysis. I think we have been taken for granted. We are the majority. Those of us who favor liberty, who believe in the Constitution, who want a country that's sane and prosperous, are in the majority. But are we so motivated that we will go to vote? Are we so motivated that we will fight against every incursion of our individual liberty? Will we fight to prevent them from taking our guns away? Will we fight to defend our children against a woke indoctrination that's leading them to understand falsely that their genders are fluid and causes them to really suffer enormously under a yoke of wokeism? Are we going to let that happen? Are we going to let people in our neighborhoods be transitioned when they're youth? Are we going to allow people to suffer no consequences when they commit murder and they rape people? Are we going to allow our towns and our cities to be ravaged by people from foreign countries coming through? Are we going to allow acts of terrorism to persist? Are we going to allow candidates for president of the United States who agree with us to be the subject of assassination attempts with no real effort to stop it? Are we going to let all that go, or is there a point at which we say we've had enough? I think we're going to say we had enough. I think we have a legacy of liberty in this country that's too precious. And I think in the end, people are going to realize when it confronts them all too clearly that unless they rise up and fight against this, we are going to lose everything. And we're going to be looking like Venezuela. And if you don't think that we're going to go there, you really are naive to the point of being absurd. We are going there in spades.
We really are. I think a rude awakening is coming when the left figures out that we're not going to fight this war like so many youngsters volunteered to fight in the 20-year Iraq, me included. I don't think that enthusiasm is there. I think people are too awakened to the industrial military complex and the war that they are starting, that is apparent, it is inherent, it is upon us. I say we're at war. They just deployed 6,000 more troops on an aircraft carrier out that way this week, as well as the 40,000 troops that are already there. They're expanding that by, I think what they said, 6,000 more this month, something like that. So I think they're going to be in a rude for awakening when they're not going to get the volunteers that they had the first time. And maybe that'll be the first kind of okay, well, maybe that'll wake them up a little bit. Last question. How do you think this election plays out? I will say that I don't think there's any way Trump wins, whether he wins or he doesn't win. It's just, maybe it's a pessimism inside of me. Maybe I'm a pessimist. I don't think that they let him win in any way, shape, or form. What's your opinion on whether Trump wins in 40 days or not?
40 days is a very long time in politics. Trump has it within his power to win this election. If he draws the contrast clearly between Kamala Harris and Kamala Harris by showing her rabid statements that she's made that have been recorded on a whole host of things, from transitioning of youth to the open borders, to allowing people out without paying bail, to supporting defunding the police. If all of that is presented and contrasted with what she says now, and we ask ourselves, who is the real Kamala Harris? And if we ask ourselves, if you've had difficulty surviving the first 3.5 years of this administration, Harris and Biden, can you survive another 4? Can you have inflation that's worse than it is now and still make it? Can you accept an open border situation where you're already worrying about whether or not you're going to be able to have safety in your communities at all? Do you think defund the police is going to get worse or better under Harris? Do you think that the Soros-backed prosecutors are going to be more common or less common under Harris? Do you think Harris will change the trajectory of the United States and the world, or do you think that we'll be in World War III? I mean, if you're rational, you'll call the direction that we've gone in the likely direction she will continue to go in, no matter what she says, because face it, she as vice president could have done a number of things. She could have developed the policy on the border because she was the border czar, but instead she brought us open borders. She could have fought against the president on all of these issues that she now says that she's shifting on. She didn't for 3 years. But most importantly, if she really believed in this country and in defending our rights and interests, she never would have gone along with this. She would have resigned as vice president. She is part and parcel of the junk, the crap that we have experienced for 3.5 years. She is going to give us that same experience. She's a patsy under the control of the Democrat Party. She's always been a patsy for those who are in power. She's never been a person who has deviated from a far left course her whole career. And she has brought California misery, and she'll bring the country misery. So I'm hoping that the Trump people can get it together and get advertising and promotion and social media out there that will draw this contrast and make it clear to every American citizen what's at stake. I haven't seen that yet. I think Trump is the solution, but the campaign is not getting that message through. If he gets the message through, I think he wins. If he doesn't get the message through, if instead she's allowed to hide from the media the entire time, and there's an obscure message, or there's difficulty comprehending what Donald Trump will do that she won't, I think people are going to do what they always do, which is either not vote or vote according to their historic voting patterns, with independents returning back principally to the Democrats and few Democrats shifting ranks. There has to be this explanation of who Kamala Harris really is and how she's a fraud in this election. And it has to get through, not just to conservatives, but to everybody. And that means the massive amounts that Donald Trump has raised have to be spent, and they have to be used to get the message to everybody. And that's how we win.
At the end of this video, I will link to you my Who is Kamala Harris video that I did about a week ago, where it's all the flip-flops. She's got more flip-flops. They're like a reef pair of sandals flip-flops, and I put them all together in about a 13 to 14-minute video for you guys. I'll show you those there. Mr. Emord, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. You have a couple of books out on Amazon. Go ahead and push those really quick before we get out of there so that people can learn more about you and find out more what you got going on.
So the most popular of the two are The Authoritarians, which documents the rise of communism in America from the 19th century to the present. And then The Rise of Tyranny, which really 20 years ago explained where we would be today, actually predicted right, and explains why it is that we're here today. But it was written 20 years ago. So anyway, but it's been a real pleasure to be on your show as usual. And I just hope that people listen, tune in, and understand that there are certain places where you get the truth, and this is one of them. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Emord. All of the links to his books will also be in the show notes. Guys, G.I. Joe said it the best. You may not have known about the George Soros buying of 200 radio stations to include some major conservative networks that you probably listen to, but now you do know, and knowing is half